Dear students, I hope you will be in good condition. Previously, we talked about the Middle Ages and we discussed about three tribes Celts, Angles, Saxons, and then the new tribe and the new era begin with the attack of the Normans. And what happened in that area, we discussed it in the previous lectures. I would recommend you to watch those lectures so that you may better understand these upcoming lectures. Go to my channel and just click on playlist and click on the history of English literature paper and watch thoroughly those lectures so that you may understand well. In the previous lecture, we talked about some important figures. Uh, that was William Langland and then John Cower, and some give some touch to Chaucer and some works done by these important figures in that era. Continuing that era, today we are going to study about the medieval period that is 1066 and 1300. And it's a very important time in the development of English literature. Well, let's move forward and see what happens in this era. The term Middle English literature refers to the literature written in the form of the English language, known as Middle English, from the 12th century until the 1470s. During this time, the Chaucer Standard, a form of Chancery Standard, a form of London based English, became common, and the printing press regularized the language. In literary terms, the characteristics of the literary works written did not change radically until the effect of the Renaissance and Reformed Christianity became more apparent in the reign of King Henry VIII. There are three main categories of Middle English literature, that is, religious, courtly love, and Arthurian. Though much of Geoffrey Chaucer's works stands out, these among the many religious works are those in the Catherine group and the writings of Julian of Norwich and Richard Rolle. Okay, what this paragraph means in simple words, that Middle English literature refers to writings in English from the 12th century to the 1470s. Uh, during this time, London-based English, which is called Chancery Standard. So by Chancery Standard, we mean a London-based English. Uh, in more simple words, I would say that Chancery Standard was a type of English language used in official documents and government papers in London. So this is simply what we mean by Chancery Standard. It does not relate to, if you're thinking about Chaucer, it's a government official work. It became a common language in England during the Middle English period. I would say think of it like a standardized office language back then. So the main categories of this time was actually the literature that was categorized in this era was actually, the one category was religious category, in which the literature was written, and the other category was courtly love, and the third category was Arthurian. What we mean by religious literature is that works focused on spirituality and faith. All the literature that was written, that was recorded, was actually belonging to spirituality and faith things, to the religious, belonging to the religious. So the writers were trying to write things that is related to religion. Another category of this time in which the literature was written was actually literature about chivalry and romantic love. And by chivalry works, we mean, the writers were trying to write about the stories of, brave men and those kind of things, bravery. And the third category in which the literature was written in this era was actually Arthurian. And Arthurian means that stories about King Arthur and his knights, his guards, his soldiers. So writers were trying in this time to write about, the King Arthur and the army that he was leading in his era, in his time. We have some notable writers include in this era, like Geoffrey Chaucer. His work doesn't fit into these category. Like the categories like I told you about, like religious, courtly love, Arthurian. So Geoffrey's writing was different than those writers who were focusing these categories. And we will discuss it further in very detail, but it's just let me give you a click what happened in this time. Okay, another notable writer in this time was Julian of Norwich and then Richard Rolle. One important thing about this time is that the characteristics of the literary work which was written didn't change. What I mean here by characteristics, let me highlight this. Characteristics of the literary works mean that the style, themes, or features of the writing, that is, literary works from that period, the characteristics didn't change much until the Renaissance and Reformed Christianity influenced. So, this is very important to note about this time, is that the characteristics of the literary work didn't change. A change was felt when Reformed Christianity appeared, which means that Reform Christianity refers to the Protestant movement that emerged in the 16th century, led by figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin. It was a response to certain Catholic Church practices, focusing on faith, scripture, and individual relationship with God. In simple term, I would say that Reformed Christianity was a big change in Christian beliefs and practices in Europe, influencing culture, politics, and literature. And this usually happened with the appearance of King Henry VIII, who was a famous English king and who ruled from 1509 to 1547. And he is known for having almost six wives. Okay, what happened by the appearance of this king is that actually, as he is known for wanting to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, which led to a big split with the Catholic Church. He then made himself the head of the Church of England, allowing himself to marry Anne Boleyn, and this changed England's religion and politics. He just broke away with, at the time the church activities was going on. He actually did, he broke away and separated the Church of England from the Catholic Church authority. He made himself the head instead of the Pope. And this let him make changes and control church decisions in England. So this was actually the things that was faced during this medieval period and during the 12th century until the 1470s. Let's move to our next topic, that is conditions after the Norman conquest of England. We have talked about this in a very detail. What happened when the Norman conquest of England? That actually the new language that was French replaced the old English, and literature and works were now written in now written by French writers, and they were developing things in this new language. So we have already talked about this, that around the turn of the 13th century, the layman wrote in the Middle English. Other transitional works were popular entertainment, including a variety of romances and lyrics. With time, the English language regained prestige. After the French that was dominating and replacing English, actually was now after the 13th century, it was regaining its strength, its position by the works of various writers and prominent figures. Of course, big hands of Geoffrey Chaucer's, who helped English to replace again that French language and continue its value and reputation. So this topic is all about the time and the activities that actually occurred after the Norman conquest of England, and we have talked about this in a very detail, just like I just summarize the previous things. So I would recommend you to please watch those lectures so that you may better understand what happened after the Norman conquest. Uh, Here also it has been written, and you can watch, you can read this for one time, and you will remind those things that we have studied before. In the 14th century, major works of English literature began once again to appear. The later portion of the 14th century also saw not only the consolidation of English as a written language and a shift to secular writing. Secular writing means people started writing more about everyday life, like writing stories, writing poems, and entertainment, instead of just focusing on religious topics. It became more about human experiences, love, adventures, etc. And this is the reason that a new taste of literature was seen in this era. And of course, when new things and new experiences appear, it means that um, things are developing. Okay, after the Norman conquest of England, the written form of the Anglo Saxon language continued in some monasteries, convents, but few literary works are known from this period under the influence of the new aristocracy. Law French became the standard language of courts, parliaments, and civil stories. As we have studied previously, that after the Norman conquest, the Anglo-Saxon language continued in some monasteries. It was just written, in churches, in those religious matters, but but by this invasion and this conquest, things then were moving towards change under the influence of French language. And law French became the standard language of courts, parliaments, and civil society. Okay, what were the impacts? By impact, we mean here that what was the effects that after the Norman conquest, when the Norman people came here, so what was the change seen in that time? So as the invaders integrated their language and literature mingled mean mixed with that of the natives. The Norman dialects of the ruling class became Anglo Norman. As we have studied before and we have discussed, that it changed into Anglo Norman. Before it was Anglo Saxons and then Anglo Norman. And Anglo Saxon underwent a gradual transition into Middle English. Political power was no longer in English hands, so the West Saxon literary language had no more influence. The previous language was not being appreciated by the upper class people, by the writers, than any other dialect. Middle English literature is written then in the mini dialect that correspond to the history. Again, that old version, that old writing, that culture and background of the individual writers. So, as we discussed before, these things we have discussed these things in very detail before, but it is just because we are now moving in a deep way and discussing the middle ages in a deep way. So that's why these things are repeating, and it's good for you so that these things will now you will be covering these things by discussing it again and again. Okay, there is a little bit spelling mistake. Let me correct it. Dear student, if you need these notes, write me in the comment box, or you can write me on WhatsApp. So I will provide these notes. It's a native and it's underwent. Okay. Now let's talk about the culture. While Anglo Norman or Latin was preferred, for high culture and administration, English literature by no means died out. With the coming of this new culture and this new language, English literature actually was dying out, and a number of important works illustrate the development of the language. So the new literature and the new writings developed this uh, French language. Other transitional works were preserved as popular entertainment, including a variety of romances and lyrics. With the time, then the English language regained prestige, and in 1362 it replaced French and Latin languages in parliaments and courts of law. So this was the culture that steadily changed with the development of English language. The early examples of Middle English literature are the Armilum and Havelock the Dane. We have just a little bit talked about this in the previous lecture also. And in the upcoming lecture, we will talk about this in very detail. Okay, let's move toward medieval romances. By medieval romances, what we mean here, that let me highlight this for you so that you may better understand. Okay. As a literary genre of high culture romance or chivalric romance is a type of prose and verses description that was popular in the aristocratic circles of high medieval and early modern Europe. Uh, so, romance as a literary genre was all about fancy stories of knights, love, and adventures. In medieval Europe, think of it like the blockbuster movies, I would say. It was popular in in posh circles. In posh circles, I mean by posh circle, I means the high class people and focused on heroic knights, love, and courtly manners. So it was the time that romance was a type of literature considered high class. People was uh, liking this high class literature that is related to romance, uh, popular among the aristocrats and upper folks in medieval Europe. It was a big deal in fancy literary circles. People and high class people, they were loving reading this romance that is related to, bravery and stories about knights and those chivalry and loyalty things. So people liked these kind of literature. There were fantastic stories about marvel filled adventures, often a knight errant represented as having heroic qualities who goes on a quest. So, what we mean here by marvel filled adventures is that adventures that were full of amazing, extraordinary, and magical stuff. Think of it like dragons, enchantments, and heroic feats. All the fantastical element that make a story exciting. So these stories were made, more good and more interesting by marvel-filled adventures, and those were all about the knights. The knights was actually a special guard that was the king's special guard, and he was brave, and he was uh, getting out for popular missions and some important missions for the country and for the king. The emphasis, let's continue. The emphasis is on love and courtly manners, differentiates it from the chanson digest and other kind of epic in which masculine military heroism dominates. So it means the emphasis on is on love and courtly manners, rather than just the chanson the guest. The chanson the guest refers to a type of medieval epic poem that focuses on heroic legend, battles, and masculine bravery. It was just all about the the bravery of men, not the female were included in these kind of things. So what we felt a change here is that the emphasis is now on love and courtly manners. This was actually a new thing, rather than just focusing on the bravery and the working of masculine kind. Ladies were also, the feminine kind was also included in this love and courtly manners, and actually this was the change in the literature that was mostly appreciated by the people of that time. Okay, let's continue. Popular literature also illustrated themes of romance, just like we discussed before, but with ironic, satiric, or Balsic intent romances revoked legends. The literature that was popular, it was also, the themes of romances, but those romances, but those romances was in the way of ironic and satiric or Balsic intent. These are the figure of speech that we are going to cover in the upcoming lectures one by one. Let me give you just a simple, introduction to this figure of speech as it has been used here. Ironic means that saying one thing and meaning another. So it's a figure of speech, like in a funny way that popular literature that was related to romance, but it was discussed in a in a funny way. And satiric means that making fun of something to criticize it, and burlesque mean that making something serious which looks silly, like I would say the example of A Serious Night. It was the story written about a serious soldier, but that serious soldier story was made in a funny way. So this is what exactly mean by burlesque intent. Romances revoked legends, fairy tales, and history to suit the readers and hearers' tastes, but by 1600 they were out of fashion. Still, the modern image of medieval is more influenced by the Romance than by any other medieval kind. And the word medieval evokes knights, troubled damsels, which is virgins, and dragons and other romantic tropes. Romances took legends, fairy tales, and historical events and changed them to fit what people wanted to read or hear. Actually, when we talk about the medieval ages, there's one thing that comes to our mind about the literature is that it was all about the romances, that was all about writing about legends and fairy tales. But by around 1600, people stopped liking these stories. But our idea of medieval, just like I said, that today is mostly shaped by these romances. That's why we think of knights and damsels, dragons, etc. By damsels here, uh, mean is that a young lady. So when we are thinking about this literature, the literature of this time, we think about these kind of things. And by 1600, the people just, was not taking much interest in these kind of things. Let's move toward forms. Not like the later form of the novel, the genre of romances dealt with traditional themes. These were distinguished from earlier epics by heavy use of marvelous events, the elements of love, and the frequent use of a net of mingled stories rather than a simple plot telling about a man characters. Forms romances are stories about old traditions, traditional ideas, like the one we discussed, that traditional ideas means the usual themes or subject that people used in old stories. In romances, these themes include things like chivalry, love, heroic adventures, and those and magical events that were common in medieval storytelling. So it was the form of literature that comes under the romance category. They are different from epic because they use magical events, just I discussed before, and many mixed stories instead of just one simple story about one man person. Cycle. Tremendously, there were three cycles of tales. These were assembled in imagination as the matter of Rome, the matter of France, and the matter of Britain. So these three things that were, circling around, and medieval authors explicitly describe these as comprising all romances. It means that there were three big groups of romances stories. The one group is matter of Rome, the other is the matter of France, and the matter of Britain. Writers said these three groups include all romance tales. A medieval epic, the medieval romance developed out of the medieval epic, particularly the matter of France, developing out of such tales as the chanson de guests, with intermediate form of where the feudal bonds of loyalty had giants or a magical horn, just we discussed before, added to the plot. The epics of Kailaman, unlike such ones as Beowulf, which is the longest poem in the old in the early, before, I would say, before 1066, already had a feudalism rather than the tribal loyalties. This was to continue in romances. So this passage actually explains how medieval romance grew from the medieval epic, especially the matter of France. It says that the origin romances developed from epics like the Chanson de Guest. So it was the inspiration, adding elements such as giants or magical objects to the stories, and feudalism and epics of Charlemagne already showed feudal loyalty bonds between lords and vassals, unlike older epics like Beowulf, which focused on tribal loyalty. And then, in continuation, this feudal theme carried over into romance tales, shaping their plots. So, this was all about today's lecture, and I hope you have understood some difficult points. If you still have any confusion or question, you can ask me directly in the comment box, or you can write me in WhatsApp. So, things are, these things are quite complicated, not that complicated if you think about it more in a more clear way, and if you noticing things and then concern about those things. So these are not difficult things. In the upcoming lecture, we are going to study about the age of Chaucer, which is the most important, uh, I would say the most important event, or the most important occurring in the literature that changed the life and that changed the history of English literature. So our upcoming lecture is all about the age of Chaucer, the 14th century, very important one, and there are a lot of things that we are going to study and cover in that lecture. I hope you understood, and you will be doing well, and you will be get the best of these lectures. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.